Hi there, I'm Laura. Welcome to my channel, Aquamarine18. As you'll know from the title of this video, this is my July 2019 recap video. So every month, towards the end of the month, or maybe the beginning of next month if I'm behind, I provide one of these recap videos to share some of the decks I've been working with, books I've read, television or film that I've enjoyed if I've watched any that particularly stand out, and just kind of fun things that I've been up to that I think folks might be interested in seeing. So the first thing that I want to share today about July is canoeing, which I've been doing a lot of, as folks who've watched my channel before or my recaps before probably know. So my video editing skills are pretty limited, as is the capacity of my computer, but I'm fairly sure I have found a way to splice in some photos from my favorite canoe trip of July. So if all is working with the technology and I've actually figured things out, I will cut right now to some photos to show one of my favorite things this month, our canoe trip. So here are a couple of photos from our time canoeing on the Indian River, which is close to where I live. This is about half an hour drive away, I think. We put in the canoe at Warsaw Caves Conservation Area, which has caves in it. We didn't go to the caves this time, but we just put our canoe in there and paddled around for a while, put it back on the truck, and then went for a swim. There's a kind of beachy area in the park as well, so we could bring some snacks and go in. It was more of a wade than a swim. The water's pretty low there right now. It's a very small river. So this was a lot of fun and a definite highlight of the month of July. Okay, so that was my canoe adventure, one of several, the most fun one. In addition to that, something I've been enjoying this month, towards the end of this month, is joining a few reading groups. I'd been really feeling like, since I finished school, which was 2016, missing that kind of opportunity to read a book with a bunch of other interested folks and have discussion. And I've joined two reading groups that I'm really excited about both. I'm just starting the reading for both, actually, but I'm really looking forward to them. So the first is facilitated by Katey Flowers, who many will know, and I will link Katey Flowers' video below discussing this group. So she started a Patreon page that has also a Discord server that is going to host a book club, among other things. And the first book we're going to be reading is called Belonging, Remembering Ourselves Home. So I've picked up this book. It's the August book for the club. We're going to have one a week. So we're just kind of starting out with the book, but there's been lots of chat in the Discord server so far, and it's been really positive and really nice to chat with folks about reading and about tarot and about lots of other things that seem to be shared interests. So I'm really looking forward to that discussion as we have actually started the books. The other reading group I've started participating in is being facilitated by Pam Palmater, and I'll link Pam Palmater's video below where she introduces her book club, which is the Reconciliation Book Club, which focuses on settler self-education on issues affecting Indigenous peoples and communities towards decolonization, reconciliation. So I'll just read briefly her page, which explains how this works. It says, in this series, I will choose a book about important issues impacting Indigenous peoples and share my review of the book. The primary focus will be on Indigenous authors from all over Turtle Island, but I will also include books from some of our allies who use writing to help advocate in solidarity with Indigenous peoples. But this will be more than just a book review video. Here's how it will work. I will give you a heads up in each video about the upcoming book I plan to review so you can purchase, borrow, or share the book. Then read it, think about it, and leave your questions, comments, and impressions in the comment box below each relevant video. That way I can address some of your questions and feedback in the upcoming video review of that specific book. So rather than being a kind of chat format, we have for the month kind of place to leave our thoughts about whatever the book is that's been chosen, and Pam will incorporate those into the discussion of that book. So I'm actually joining the group on the second book. The first book is one that I had read quite some time ago, so I decided to just jump in on the second. So the book that I've just started reading, which is the August book, is called An Act of Genocide, Colonialism and the Sterilization of Aboriginal Women by Karen Stote. I'm just about 30 pages in out of 160. So it's just introducing the topic, and so far talking about some of the ways that white feminist movements in Canada have at times advanced discourses and politics that kind of dovetailed with or aligned with state policies around sterilization and eugenics policies. So I'm learning a lot. I know a little bit about this going into this particular read, but I'm really glad for the kind of focused opportunity to read this, and I look forward to maybe throwing a few comments in and hearing Pam talk about the book. So I think I'm going to learn a lot in this reading group for sure. Shifting on from reading groups, I'm sure they'll be interested in hearing about decks. So I've worked with 2 decks this month, July, 1 tarot and 1 oracle. So the tarot folks will know, since I did a unboxing not so long ago, is the Numinous Tarot. It's gilded in gold. After a lot of shuffling, the gilding is starting to go a little bit, but I actually like that. I think it makes it look well loved, so that's no problem at all. It took me way too long to pick up this deck. It's been out for a while. I think this is the 2nd edition. There are so many cards that I really like, and the court cards are renamed to, I believe, Dreamer, Explorer, Mystic, and Creator. And I really like that. The deck is really not just diverse. Like, we talk a lot about diverse, and diverse is important, but it's also not enough on its own, right? Like, just having lots of people. It's diverse in a way wherein the representations are positive and multifaceted and complicated and human, and that is really important, I think. But really along kind of every line that we talk about there being a lack of representation in tarot, whether it's underrepresentation of people of color or folks of diverse abilities, or queer folks, or genderqueer folks. There's a lot of representation in this deck, and the deck is just really beautiful. The artwork is beautiful. The backs are beautiful. It's kind of pastel colored. And I've really been enjoying using this deck for daily draws for the most part. And I will be using it later today for my new moon reading. I haven't spent very much time with the guidebook. I think the guidebook's really written nicely, and I read a lot of the kind of preliminary material, like introducing the deck and things like this, and how to look at some of the spreads there. But I haven't really been reading the card meanings too much. I often don't really, but I hope to look at that a little bit more. And of course, I had to make a bag for this deck. It comes in quite a large box, and I like to keep my decks on a shelf that's fairly small, a little bit more compact way. And so, of course, for a deck that's this colorful, it's a very bright, many-colored, with pastel backs. I had to find the brightest fabric in the sale bin that I possibly could, that would match really well with the palette of this deck. So what I came up with was this, it almost looks like a horizon fabric, and it's kind of half pastel and half bright. And this is actually made out of swimsuiting. So it's very, very stretchy. Stitching it was a bit not the easiest for me, but I think it goes really well with the color scheme of the deck. Like, I think that looks really good together. That's one of my favorite cards, Justice. So I think that's perfect. It holds the cards well, and it has a drawstring, and it has enough room. I can stick a crystal in there if I want to. I can keep the book separate. So there's my Numinous Tarot, and I'm really, really happy with that. And the Oracle deck I've been using it alongside of is the Saltwater Reading Cards by Laura Bowen. And I had been working with this deck, I think, the month before as well, and just didn't want to switch it out for something else. I am utterly in love with this deck. I love the colors. It feels summery. It feels light. The messages feel balanced. And it's been really, for a daily draw in the morning, to have the card and then to read the book, the messages have been really lovely. There have been a few that were really affecting in ways that happens sometimes, but that I wasn't necessarily expecting on a particular day. Laura Bowen's writing is beautiful, and these colors really went well with the Numinous Tarot. I think that they look really complementary in a way that I wouldn't have necessarily expected. They're not decks that really kind of have anything in common on the face of it necessarily, but I've really, really enjoyed getting to know the creatures in the Saltwater Reading Cards. And I was really drawn to this deck as having a kind of watery ocean theme, being a Pisces, drawn to watery things in general. But now, having really worked with the book and worked with the cards for a couple of months, I think I really might have to seek out Laura Bowen's other deck, the Dreamtime Reading Cards, as well, which I've never had any plan of getting, but this deck I've enjoyed so much that one kind of has to be on my list as well. So that's the end of the tarot content for this update video. So if that's what you're here for, that's where this stops. I've been reading a lot this month. So I'll just give a very, very quick overview of the books, not including the ones I've already talked about for the reading groups because I'm just starting those, but books that I've actually started and finished in July 2019. So the first book that I read and finished in 2019, and a lot of these were on my Kindle, so I don't actually have that much to show you. The one book I have to show you that I borrowed from a friend, and this was just a fluke, I didn't plan on reading this, was Philip K. Dick's Radio Free Albemuth. So this is the last novel that Philip K. Dick wrote before he passed. For folks who don't know, Philip K. Dick, he's a very well-known science fiction author, wrote a number of best-selling, award-winning novels, many short stories as well. One of the best known is probably Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep? That's a favorite. I've read that one before too, but I'd been mentioning that I just hadn't read a lot of Philip K. Dick, that I had liked, the few that I'd read, but not much. And my friend said, oh, well, you should take this one. And I don't want to give away spoilers. It's a neat one. It didn't quite grab me at the beginning, I'll be honest. There's a lot of kind of setup to the beginning of the book, setting up the time period and the cultural context, because it's a kind of set in historical United States, with much of that being kind of references to actual historical figures who existed, who we know about. They're in the book, but then there's also this kind of alternative narrative, right? So there's many also characters that did not exist. So it's an interesting kind of approach. It is very much science fiction. It has a real kind of paranoia to it. The protagonist is kind of living in a context of neighbors informing on each other and a really kind of repressive political context. And so there's a lot of this kind of worry about, who's going to be knocking at the door at any given time that is quite intense. And then there's this kind of science fiction or supernatural kind of backdrop that's being introduced, and you're not always entirely sure what's going on until the very end. And even then, it's perhaps open to interpretation. So I enjoyed that very much. I also read, and the rest of these books, I can't really show you because I read them on my Kindle. So I have a Kindle. There's my case for the Kindle. It looks, the same as as any other Kindle, Oasis. So I've been reading ebooks on there and enjoying that. So I read an anthology, Godless Paganism, Voices of Non-Theistic Pagans, edited by John Halstead, and this was a book that Katey Flowers did a review video of. So I will link Katey's review of Godless Paganism below. And it sounded like something that I would be interested in, for sure. Being interested in and perhaps thinking of myself at times as pagan of sorts, but also being someone who does not work with personified deity in any kind of way. The title was kind of, okay, this could be something that I would get along with. Sorry, my cats are, hey, do you have to fight right now? They're having a little disagreement, and you can probably hear them. Sorry. So Godless Paganism, I was interested in it. I thought I'll for sure get something out of this anthology. So I read the whole thing cover to cover. I enjoyed it. I took a lot of notes. I learned a lot about the kind of accommodating nature and breadth of the term paganism, and how many kind of disparate sets of beliefs or types of beliefs can kind of fall under this big umbrella term, ranging from, very much polytheist to entirely atheist, right? And that was really interesting to me. I liked, inevitably with the anthology, I liked some pieces a lot more than others. Most of the authors had multiple pieces in the anthology, so most authors had, 2 or 3 short sections. All of the sections are quite short. 5 pages or something like this, on the Kindle, 5 pages anyway, or 5 screens, I guess. But it was really interesting. Some of it I struggled with in that I felt at times some of the authors really elevate Western science in a way that doesn't work for me, as though Western science is somehow objective and truthful in ways that other systems of knowledge, like orally passed traditions, indigenous knowledges, for example, alternative medicines, things that have been existing for centuries and centuries, are kind of pushed aside like they're superstitious or they're not real knowledge, because kind of Western science is where it's at. Some of the authors really kind of advance that kind of discourse, which strikes me as colonial, to be quite blunt. So that aspect didn't work for me quite so much. But I mean, I'm not necessarily reading a book to just find a bunch of people who 100% agree with me on everything. So that's totally fine. I learned a lot. I took copious amounts of notes and just ended up with a lot of books to trace down, references to add to my never-ending books to read list, terms that I had never come across before, to look up. So I really enjoyed that. It sent me on a whole kind of path of exploration that I didn't really expect, and maybe I'll talk about more in another video. That was Godless Paganism, edited by John Halstead. Really interesting. And so the final 3 books I read in July I'll talk about together, since they're a set. And that is the Wayfarer series, which is written by Becky Chambers, and it is a science fiction series. I want to say that it's a trilogy because there are 3 novels in the series. However, I keep seeing it referred to as a series, so I'm not sure if that may or may not mean that Becky Chambers plans to write more books in the same universe. So all 3 of the novels, which are The Long Way to a Small Angry Planet is the first one, A Close and Common Orbit is the second one, and Record of a Spaceborne Few is the third. All 3 are kind of in the same universe. There is a very small degree of character overlap. So, for example, a character who was central to the first book, one of his relatives who is not kind of in the action of the first book, but that you hear him kind of refer to a few times, I have a relative here, ends up being a more major character in the third book. So there is some interconnection, and it's the same universe and close to the same time period, but it's not a linear kind of progression with the same characters throughout. And I picked up this series because I was kind of looking around for new or newer fiction to read that I hadn't come across. And I read someone review, I think it was the first book, A Long Way to a Small Angry Planet. And I read a few different reviews that kind of in different ways said, you know, this is a kind of queer space opera that mixes elements of Firefly and Star Trek. And so when I read this a few times, I'm like, okay, this is clearly something that I want in my life. You know, queer, yes. Space opera, absolutely. Firefly and Star Trek, right up my alley, I'm in. And so I picked up the first book as an ebook on Kindle, read it, picked up the second one, read it, picked up the third, and I have a tiny, tiny bit left that I'll probably read tonight. So I've read all 3 novels since starting them on July 11th. Daryl and Bandit, maybe you could fight after. Okay. They're chasing. I don't know what the conflict is, but... So yeah, that's the Wayfarer series by Becky Chambers. It's really fun. It's really light reading in a lot of ways compared to what I would normally go for in terms of science fiction and fantasy. A lot of my favorite authors that I read a lot of are, I would say, like quite a bit heavier than this one. But I've really enjoyed all 3 books. The third one, I would say, a little less than the other 2, if only because the third one, which is Record of a Spaceborne Few, alternates between quite a few narrators. So each chapter has a name of a character as its title and goes from one character to the next. And I find it's just maybe a few too many viewpoints to keep straight. But so I would say I like the first 2 books better. But I liked all 3. I'm glad I've been reading them. I'm glad to have found them. If you like science fiction and are looking for a queer space opera to read, you know, this summer or anytime, then absolutely Wayfarer series by Becky Chambers was really a fun read. So in terms of upcoming for August, it's July 31st. I'm not sure what my August decks will be at this point. I'm going to look at my collection and decide. I may just keep on working with the Numinous Tarot for now. I am going away for 4 days in August, and we're going cottaging, camping. So I kind of suspect I will not be taking any, indie decks with me. We're going to be kind of out in the middle of nowhere. Things have a habit of getting kind of dirty or damaged or wet on trips like this. So I probably won't. I'll take a deck for sure, but I would prefer when I'm going somewhere like camping to take something that I can affordably replace easily, mass market. So that'll be what I'll be working with. But I'm really excited about that vacation. My goodness, I need one. And that'll be great. So I'm not sure what decks I'll be working with. I'm not sure what books I'll read aside from the 2 that I have for my reading group, which are both obviously nonfiction. So I'm not sure what my next novel will be. I have a few on the Kindle that are kind of in the queue by authors that I've read before. So we'll see. It'll be a surprise in August what I've read. So that's my little recap. I hope you've enjoyed it. What have you been shuffling or reading or watching in July? Let me know in the comments below, and have a great day.